So Tenzin, I thought people should get to know you personally first. You've written the book in Running Toward Mystery. It's metaphoric as well as literal. You actually ran toward toward your future, so to speak. So tell us a little bit about where the book came from, how you actually became a monk, and and quickly, really, your journey to what you're doing now. You are now leading the Dalai Lama Center for Ethics and Transformative Values at MIT. You have about, I think, over 6 Nobel Peace Laureates as your board members, and you've done various things in academic humanitarian. You got the Distinguished Alumni Award from Harvard for your contributions to humanity. I mean, the list is quite long. But at the core of it, what I found in my conversations with you is still the inquisitiveness of the child that actually ran toward this destiny. So tell us a little bit about how you ended here and exactly about the Center for Ethics, and tell us a little bit about that.
Well, thank you. It's truly a delight to have this opportunity to have this conversation. Let's see. Getting to know me, I'm still trying to get to know myself. So in a couple of years, I think we'll have better responses. The book was sort of in the making for almost the past decade or so, mostly due to urging of my students who found aspects of my life intriguing. And initially, of course, everybody suggested I should write a memoir. But I told my publishers that I'm too young to write a memoir, and my life will probably change and evolve quite a bit. So the book is primarily focused on, learnings and teachers and certain concept encounters from all aspects of spiritual and humanitarian domains. And it is literally running toward mystery. I was having recurring visions starting at the age of 6, and by the time I turned 10, it became really strong. So I ran away from my boarding school, and I ended up in a Buddhist temple, and that sort of set me on this path. And I became a monk. Came to the U.S. Almost, I think now, almost 25 years ago or so to do my secular studies, and found my way to MIT after my graduate school or during grad school. And about 10 years ago, I started this venture by building the Center for Ethics at MIT, primarily to, what I like to suggest is to nurture and promote ethical imagination in the field of education and governance and so on. So that's where things are with me, with the work, learning every day.
You talk about how the 2008 financial crisis was a critical moment in building this center, especially to think about ethics and transformative values. I mean, even before COVID, there's when that financial crisis happened, I think there was a lot of introspection in America, and especially around the world also. As I said, in this millennium, we are looking a lot more into ourselves. So how did this come about, and how was it decided that you would be leading this? Who are some of the people associated with it? Tell us a little bit about the center, the types of work you do there.
Sure. So the initial conversation started around 2007. I was I was on a sort of tour of American universities giving talks on leadership and other related things. And one of the things that struck me at that point was that there wasn't really much emphasis in academia on the study and practice of ethics, that mostly it was limited to philosophy departments where people were doing ethics 101 or things of that nature. But it wasn't really sort of highlighted as a relevant discipline. And then the financial meltdown happened, and the entire world started to question the credibility and the integrity of education imparted in business schools and schools of management. And a lot of universities, reacted to that sense of criticism and started to evaluate, what they were doing in terms of ethics. Prior to, for example, 2008, most 2-year MBA programs, in the best case scenario, spend 30 minutes on ethics, talking about ethics as part of the MBA ventures. So the emphasis shifted, and that's when the center sort of started to design new ways of thinking about ethics and new ways of imparting sort of a critical understanding of ethics. Because one thing we realized, that ethics cannot be just taught in a prescriptive manner that was being the model traditionally. It cannot just be talked in terms of the context of historicity and law. That people actually need to understand the distinction between ethics and compliance. That those are two sort of distinct fields. They are related, but they're two distinct drivers of why people become ethical and why people and organizations become compliant. And so we started our sort of experiments with MBA programs, and then we ventured into governance. And now our programs are, with the hub being at MIT, our programs run in about 10 countries. We work with education institutions. We work with government. In Colombia, we are working with Supreme Court justices. We work with law enforcement agencies. So we have really sort of panned out. And then about 3 or 4 years ago, a lot of my efforts have been around shaping the conversation around ethics in technology and design. So sort of really trying to build a momentum on ethical by design.
Yeah. So if we may continue on that, can you give us a specific example of a group of companies you're working with on a certain issue? How would you bring the idea of ethics into the corporate culture? I just want to say that one of my favorite quotes is one of our inner circle members, Anuaga, said that making money, making profits for a business is like breathing. You have to do it, but the purpose of life is not breathing. So the purpose of a corporate is much beyond making profits and shareholder value, which is the common ground. So from that point of view, what do you feel, what are some specific things you have done within companies where you bring this way of thinking?
So, as you are a veteran of Silicon Valley, there are too many NDAs that people sign
Yes.
to reveal
That's why
names.
I don't want names of companies.
But I can tell you, for example, working with a renowned company around the idea of how people utilize time, for example, and this challenge with designers that screen time was becoming more addictive, and at least one thing that people could do is become more aware of how much time they were spending on certain apps and certain ways. And initially, we were trying to sort of push the idea that perhaps the app could automatically shut down after a certain hour. So if you're spending like an hour on social media platform without any break, that the app will simply warn you and say, hey, take a 15-minute to 20-minute break, and then we'll come back again. But of course, due to the legal loopholes with the app company and so on, we could not do that. So we reached a middle ground, which was that it will become sort of an inbuilt feature, a design that would at least make users self-aware of how much screen time they were spending on things. So there are a lot of such design processes that we are working with a variety of Silicon Valley companies on this issue. I think a couple of things that we need to recognize is making money is fine. I'm not against making money at the very outset. The issue becomes is one that Silicon Valley has become very good, just like Wall Street in the past and present, in virtue signaling. That saying that we design something that is going to change the world for better. And it's a narrative that we need to sort of deeply reflect on with a sense of radical honesty. That is that statement valid? Is that statement true? And more importantly, I think the question becomes, and this is where the economic arguments sort of need to reach their limits, is that when you design certain forms of technology or certain platforms that begin to threaten civic institutions and that begin to threaten the robustness of civic society. You see, so when certain platforms begin to threaten democracy, when certain platforms begin to threaten judicial system that has taken hundreds of years, they are not perfect by any means, but it has taken hundreds of years to get to building those institutions. And it's not positive disruption, it's just a simple threatening to those institutions. How should we think about regulating those technologies or platforms? How should we think about interacting with them such that they don't threaten the sanctity of civic society and civic institutions? And there is no economic argument that can sort of compensate for deterioration of trust in civic society.
And I think, one of the things you brought up is almost like there's a self-imposed values we have to develop in people, responsibility we have to develop in people. It's not just punitive that it's going to shut off, but how do you make people responsible for the amount of time they're spending, etc. And some of it comes from being exposed to thought like this, to being exposed to those questions, the thoughts, what am I, as I'm designing this system, what am I responsible for, etc. And I'm sure in your life, in the book you covered about what are the things that inspired you to be able to ask these questions to get to who you are, the people who have inspired you, the incidents that have inspired you. Maybe tell us a little bit about this that you covered in the book of what has brought you to this way of thinking. Who are some of the people who influenced you?
I think in terms of influences, there are quite a few individuals, some more well-known, some less well-known. But I think in primary influences, I would say early on, Mother Teresa, who sort of, set me on a critical sort of thinking about the gap between when we think about being compassionate and being of value versus how we manifest it in society. And then, of course, my own spiritual mentor and preceptor, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who sort of has constantly encouraged the sense of inquisitiveness or a sense of curiosity across different disciplines. And he was one of the individuals who sort of, despite of me juggling between, a religious life and a secular sort of education, he constantly encouraged me to go on and study physics and go on and study Western philosophy in academic settings to maintain sort of this healthy balance of learning and curiosity. And many of these individuals, who became influenced are individuals also that I actually approached and they became sounding boards for the Center for Ethics. And just to go tangential a bit, when I started the Center for Ethics at MIT, it did not have the Dalai Lama's name. It was just called Center for Ethics. So I was like, I'm a Buddhist monk running it, and if I give it the Dalai Lama's name, people would think it's just another sort of Buddhist religious enterprise. And I had approached 6 Nobel Peace Laureates, with most of them who were sort of close mentors, to become founding members. And Archbishop Tutu of Cape Town, he sort of pointed to this thing that in 2008, this French company had did a global polling of most influential leaders, not just religious leaders or political leaders, but just leaders. And the Dalai Lama had topped the chart. And so Tutu basically said, you should give the center his name before some rich guy gives money to MIT and his or her name goes on the center. And we used to jokingly say that, because, the entire credibility of the Center for Ethics is going to be questioned if some wealthy name goes on the board. So.
That's great. The other thing is when you write a book, it's almost like a diary, right? It's a journey within yourself also. So while writing, what were your aha moments? What is it that came out of the book that you were glad you wrote about? And and then on top of it, was there a surprise for you yourself as you're writing the book about what came out of it?
Oh, that's a great question. I think the first part of the book, of course, is much more personal than I intended to be. I am a private individual, but I wanted to sort of be reflective of the idea that spiritual life and the priorities that one makes in spiritual life oftentimes are at odds or in conflict with social narratives and expectations. So, the challenges that were posed by my own family and the stature of the family in society and the struggles around that were insightful to look back retrospectively and to think about what my parents might have gone through in all these years of struggles. Because when you're young and you're on you're moving forward with this kind of conviction, 11 or 12 years old, you're not thinking about those kinds of things. Education, for example, I had completely sort of written off education. I had aversion to mainstream education because I thought it was a complete waste of time, and we were simply sort of, making it as a sort of a feeding pipeline for market economy. Not much has changed in that particular perception, but I think coming to universities and having this ability to meet certain thinkers, certain teachers who approach the subject in such sort of holistic manner that it sort of helped me think that there are actually worthwhile endeavors even in academia, that one can engage in. There are lessons, for example, there's a whole chapter on Archbishop Tutu and my sort of learnings and meetings with him, and this idea of thinking about forgiveness, for example, not as sort of just as a human attribute, but thinking of it as a policy, thinking of it as a policy in our social systems, in our legal systems, and what it can actually do for human society. And very recently, another dear friend, Martha Minow, who's the former dean of Harvard Law School, she just came out with a book, sort of emphasizing this whole idea of how forgiveness can play an important role in legal systems. So this sense of things that we think of or we want to limit only as spiritual virtues or human virtues, but not recognizing that it should not be disconnected with civic virtues. And so forgiveness and hope and compassion, these are not just fluffy topics, but these can be momentum builders and game changers in policy development.
What is the most personal thing you wrote about here that you usually don't talk about?
I think one of the most personal thing is in the epilogue of the book, and that's a conversation with my father a couple of years before he had passed away, my father and I had a very interesting relationship. He was a bureaucrat, following sort of the family trend of politicians and bureaucrats and so on. And for the longest time, he had tremendous difficulty in accepting what I was doing. He was encouraging to some degree, but he has always hoped that I would sort of either return to India and join the sort of the political matrix of the family, or become a different kind of civic leader or something of that nature. And one of the most sort of memorable conversations that I tried to put in, which was really personal, was this last conversation that I had with him. One of the last conversations, and I was in Cambridge, and I was getting ready to go out and teach my class, and he called me, and we were talking, and jokingly, when I was young, I used to borrow his shoes. He was a big sort of aficionado for shoes and pens and things like that, and so he had this remarkable collection of shoes, and I would just wear them, and then go play soccer with them, in school. So it'll be like destroying his shoes on playgrounds, and so I basically was jokingly telling him that I'll get you a pair of shoes when I'm in India next. And then I said, my feet have outgrown yours. And I meant it literally. My feet has outgrown his. And his response was that it's not just your feet that have outgrown me. You have outgrown me entirely. And there was this kind of sentiment, that was carried in his voice that I had seldom experienced in the past. And so, when I was thinking about how to close the book, in terms of all the moments of learning and so on, this was, I think, one of the most personal moments that I have mentioned in the book, about this conversation, and my father sort of coming finally to the sense of acceptance that even spiritual life is a worthwhile life.
Yeah, that's great. So I have one last question before I bring our two panelists in as a segue into it. This your center has worked on various things. Do you feel that? Can you talk about anything that you feel, wow, we've accomplished that, something huge that you've accomplished, or something you're on the path of right now? So, because all big ideas take a long time to accomplish. It's not like you think about it and next year you do.
True,
Can
very true.
you give a think of something that has come out or something you're on the path to a breakthrough?
Yeah, I think I can give a couple of markers. I mean, one is, ethical imagination is an audacious goal,
Yes.
especially in an environment that we live in. Couple of things. One, our work with legal systems in Colombia. Our programs were the program that brought together the chief Supreme Court justices and the Supreme Court judges together after a span of 31 years in
Mm-hmm.
Colombia, that,
Wow.
that they were operating in silos, partly because of the threat to their life and during the drug war and so on. The kind of momentum that we have built up actually in the conversation, even from the background, even from backstage, in terms of promoting conversation around ethics and governance of artificial intelligence. It was a conversation that did not impact the design process for the longest time, and it took almost 4 to 5 years built up. And with a very simple thing, simple questions like having lead designers of all the companies and saying, what are the technologies that you're working on that you feel 100% comfortable having your kids and grandkids use it
Mm-hmm.
without any sense of reservation? A simple question like that
Yeah.
started a whole conversation around the pros and cons of certain platforms. So I think certain kinds of roundtable conversations with sort of movers and shakers in civic society, looking at ways of developing new kinds of video games and apps to
Mm-hmm.
help foster critical thinking around ethical learning
Mm-hmm.
in school systems and so on. So it is an ongoing task. We have been at it for 10 years, but I
Yeah.
think there are certain milestones that we can look back and say, yeah, it is working and it's worth pushing it ahead.
And you're running a global organization. You come from India, so when you look from a global perspective to India, what are the things, especially at the intersection of technology and ethics, what are the things that give you most concern and most hope?
I think one of the biggest concerns with India would be, well, let's start with hope. The biggest hopeful thing in India, I think, is the sense of diversity in terms of thinking and imagination. And India, I think, is one of the countries and its people that's best suited for sort of bridging the sense of tradition and the future, meaning that it not all of it needs to be a disconnected platform to think deeply about sort of encouraging and nurturing a kind of healthy technologies, in terms of the conversation around well-being of civic society and well-being of individuals, and how
Mhm.
technology can promote those kinds of conversations is of utmost value. And I think that's something that India brings to the forefront, because we cannot do away with tradition. In terms the richness of it, we have to simply reinterpret the stories. We have to tell them in a new way. Otherwise, it's a kind of intellectual poverty or poverty of imagination that we would be experiencing as some countries are. In terms of the challenges, I do think that we should not blindly imitate Western pedagogies, that influence the systems of education or the systems of tech development and so on. Again, money is an important thing, but to invest in ideas that are going to promote a healthy civic society, that is going to promote a sense of understanding is very important. Otherwise, what's the point of being a first world country that is almost at the verge of a brink of a civic war because of racial tensions and economic disparity? Meaning, again, it's the issue of narrative. When Apple became the first $1 trillion company, the narrative was, it's the first $1 trillion company, it's going to create value for everybody. No, it hasn't. We have another $1 trillion company, but the fact is disparity is ever increasing. So at some point we need to pause and reflect whether those narratives are actually true.
Yeah, great.